Hello and warm welcome to the session about brain research in the European and in fact global landscape. What we will discuss during this session is how we can scale up research, how we can create an enabling environment for scientific advances in Europe and beyond, in particular when leveraging the opportunities that the Ebrains research infrastructure offers. I'm delighted to be joined in this panel by Professor Paul Boon, Professor of Neurology and Director of Neuroscience at Ghent University, and President-elect of the European Academy of Neurology, with which we are having an ever closer cooperation. And also Professor Bjaalie, the Infrastructure Development Director at the Human Brain Project and a member of the Management Board of Ebrains. So brain research in the European agenda, where are we today? Well, today we have a number of large projects and programs, such as the Human Brain Project, such as the JPND, the Neurodegenerative Disease Research Program, and also ERANET Neuron, which is focusing on a number of brain conditions in its scientific work. We also have a spectrum of smaller projects funded and to be funded by Horizon Europe grants for basic science and innovation. Finally, we have a lot of member state funding, and some of that is coordinated. We benefit ourselves in the Human Brain Project from a coordination platform called FLAGERA, which ensures that a number of funding agencies help to generate projects which can then use the Ebrains research infrastructure. Next steps are being taken. We are proud members of the EBRA consortium. EBRA is the European Brain Research Area, project coordinated by the European Brain Council. And the very objective of EBRA is to identify gaps which exist in today's research and to construct an agenda for the future. A product of this work will be a document called the Shared European Brain Research Area, which will see the light of day in a few months' time, which will be presented after thorough research work and investigation and joint discussions among a number of stakeholders. And it will focus on identifying what are the priorities and challenges from the multi-scale understanding of the brain through personalized medicine to how brain-related disorders can be examined throughout lifetime. And there will also be a focus on enabling actions, in particular, how we can increase the role of patient-centered and caregiver-centered brain research in the future. So all this is meant to take us towards a partnership on brain health in the latter half of Horizon Europe. And the nature of partnership instruments is that they first of all overcome fragmentation and duplication of research efforts. Secondly, that they construct a joint roadmap and group all the main stakeholders together. And thirdly, that they bring critical scale of investment for radically new innovations. And I quoted in the slide the exact wording of the European Commission when it speaks about partnerships, so that we understand well what the scale of ambition here is. We have a sense, and our chairman, André Sirota, spoke about this at the European Brain Summit a couple of days ago, that we need to fill the gap between where we are today and the partnership on brain health in the future. And this gap can be filled by the broader European Brain Initiative. And a particular pillar of that broader European Brain Initiative needs to be about pulling together expertise, overcoming fragmentation, coordination of research efforts, and I would call that the Brain Knowledge Hub. And another pillar, apart from the partnership on brain health, would be focused on technology, would be focused on how we can help and enable neurotechnology to move forward, how we can also enable brain-inspired computing and AI to advance. So this is very much something we need to discuss openly. Now, the new element in that landscape is the Ebrains research infrastructure. It is the first time that neuroscience in Europe can rely on an infrastructure of its own. An infrastructure that pulls together the best of the different communities can offer, because that's very much the logic of Ebrains, that it relies on what different countries and different communities can provide in their fields of expertise, be it brain atlases, be it simulation or modeling, and all that is supported by computing and storage power. We aim to be globally relevant in the sense that we aim to offer state-of-the-art tools that would be of unprecedented nature in the global scale, for example, with regards to the resolution of neuroimaging data or brain atlases, and also that we would make these tools available to the broader global community. Ebrains relies on a number of services, and a session in a moment will go into detail about that. But what I would like to say is that these services are based on a concept of building blocks, and the idea here is to be flexible and to adapt to the needs of individual researchers, to construct the workflows which best reflect individual scientists' needs. Ebrains was selected in July of this year to be on the ESFRI Roadmap 2021. What is the ESFRI Roadmap? It is the list of Europe's top science facilities. So we're very happy about that achievement, but ESFRI is also a certain ambitious threshold that all infrastructures need to meet. There is a number of requirements which we have to fulfill as we go along, and we have to be very well aware of it, from scientific excellence, which is at the heart of each research infrastructure, all the way to financial sustainability. And this is in a nutshell the life cycle which we are planning, moving slowly into the implementation phase of Ebrains after 2023. And I will end by saying that the philosophy of Ebrains is, first of all, to be an enabler of scientific breakthroughs, but also to be an initiator of scientific projects. And we are open to joining ranks with many of the institutions that you represent for new scientific projects which Ebrains would help to advance. So with this in mind, I would like to turn to Professor Boon and ask him how he sees the European and possibly global landscape as well, where he sees the most pressing needs in terms of avoiding fragmentation, in terms of creating synergies, but also in terms of how data is treated and where we need to support technological advances. Professor Boon.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Świeboda. Paweł, I think you gave a very eloquent account of the state of the art, and at the same time you touched upon some of the major challenges that we are indeed facing. So if you ask me what is really needed, what should be on the agenda to enhance brain research in Europe, there's a couple of real issues and real major factors. The one that I personally find the most important, and you briefly touched upon, is the really starting point. What is the why? What is the need? Well, the need is very simple. We have this greatly unmet need of a highly prevalent group of diseases. Basically, to put it very straightforwardly and maybe a bit simplistically, but I mean, we know from very sound research that has been published in the past and recently has emerged again in the international top literature, half of the people in Europe are suffering from a neurological, or in a larger proportion, a brain disorder, which means that basically you could divide the one half of the population as being patients, and the other half are patients who apparently have no brain disorder. And in these patients, we should be concerned with brain health. And I mean, these are the two things. And I'm putting it maybe a bit exaggerating, but I mean, it is just for the purpose of making the point. Where is the European Academy of Neurology coming in all this? Well, awareness is really key. And that is one of our 4 strategic key points. And the other one is science. So we're really in the heart of what the Human Brain Project and Ebrains are aiming at. We are representing 45,000 neurologists in Europe. We are representing 47 countries. So that brings me to the first priority. It is collaboration. I mean, we need to more collaborate in Europe. There's a lot of things going on, lots of initiatives. It is a fantastic scenery, really. I mean, if you see what's going on, it's just breathtaking, but we really need to collaborate better. Taking into account the enormous potential that we have in Europe, and at the same time, keeping the leadership position that Europe has in neuroscience, both basic neuroscience and clinical neuroscience. So that is also on top of the agenda. That is really top on the agenda of the Academy. And I think there we could find each other, Ebrains and the European Academy of Neurology. Which brings me to the other thing, saying that there and seeing and just watching what's going on in the field, lots of things are going on. We should take care that we do not scatter our efforts too much, and we really bring together. We really need to bring together the stakeholders in such a way that we avoid or that we promote synergies and we avoid redundancy. That is really, I think, key, and we are in the position to do so. With regard to data, and you mentioned that, I mean, that's really the key thing of the Human Brain Project, very focused in the beginning on neuroanatomy, but now it's much bigger. The toolbox is rather impressive. And if we see what is going to happen in the coming years, it's even more impressive. One thought that I have is that, well, big data, lots of data, very high quality data are essential to moving forward the research agenda. But there is another factor. We are facing increasing regulation with regards to data and data sharing. And I mean, if we are not careful and if we do not play it smartly, I believe that GDPR and other very necessary, I'm not putting this into question, I'm not questioning the need for that. But I mean, in the field, it may be sometimes perceived that increased attention to regulation is not facilitating research, but making research more difficult. And this is really what we need to avoid. So, I mean, by organizing these large data sets that are available and are made available within the current regulation to large communities, I think that is really, really key to bringing or to advancing brain research in Europe. The other thing, and the last thing that I would like to say in terms of priorities from our side that we believe could be shared with Ebrains, is the ecosystem, the brain ecosystem that you also mentioned in your introduction. Giving all these voices, it's wonderful, but we need to make sure that we speak with one voice. And I think in that sense, the talking all the different stakeholders being on one frequency, talking with one voice is extremely important. And what I would like to point out here is that, and we are only at the beginning of this initiative, but I think it's very important, the EAN-EFNA One Neurology partnership, I think is very key. I mean, if you talk about a disease, we're not talking about diseases, we are thinking about the patients, and the patient's perspective is really what is key. And as doctors, as healthcare professionals, we are the ones who are in direct contact with our patients. So the patient voice in this whole context and in this whole conversation, I believe, is very key.
For these comments. I particularly appreciate what you said about this dual need for our focus on good brain health on the one hand and on brain conditions on the other. Because if we are to make the case for a greater role for brain research in Europe, we need that dual focus as we go along. Now, if I could ask you a short follow-up question on the issues of data, which you referred to, because in yesterday's discussions, we've heard a lot about this, and Gita Knudsen, for example, spoke about the replication crisis, which she sees in neuroimaging data. And she said that she has high hopes for Ebrains to help to overcome that type of fragmentation, which perhaps goes beyond what we see in other disciplines. Would you share that feeling and that sense of urgency to act in the field of data with the opportunities that Ebrains could offer in the field?
No, I clearly copy that. We're fully on the same page there. If I may just, try to bring a little bit. Well, it is within focus, but maybe from a slightly different perspective. Two things that are particularly relevant to the European Academy of Neurology, to the healthcare community dealing with people who suffer from brain disorders, is trying to come up with guidelines, with practical instructions for those people who take care of the patients. There's many guidelines already, but for many of these guidelines, not only for the frequent diseases, but also for the more rare diseases, we lack the numbers of patients, we lack the data. We simply lack the data to be able to formulate guidelines. So there I see an enormous role for Ebrains as a potential enabler. I honestly like that term. To be the enabler is really, I think, a fantastic aim and a fantastic purpose for any organization, and also in brain research. What we lack for the moment is sufficient high-quality data sets to be able to formulate clinical guidelines for healthcare professionals taking care of patients. Just one example. Another one is with regard to modeling and the relationship with data and modeling, and the present toolbox that the Human Brain Project has, and the the high ambition that Ebrains has with regard to models. I would just make a very or present a very short example, a very concrete example. The models that we presently use for frequent and also for rare diseases, as far as we understand these diseases, which is often not the case, by the way, but in those diseases in which we have a fair understanding of the mechanism, we do have models, but many models are just, the ultimate model is the human brain, obviously, but I mean, we still are stuck with the traditional preclinical models, animal models, just thinking of the virtual environment in which we could test new diagnostic tools and new therapeutic tools in a completely virtual way would really mean a dramatic revolution, really. And I mean, given I myself have a background in experimental preclinical research, the modeling there and the efforts that Ebrains is aiming at, I think, are revolutionary, at least if they come to, let's say, new solutions and new propositions in that sense.
Thank you very much, Paul, for this comment and statement, and we take it very much to our hearts, and we'll treat it as a mission in the months and years to come to serve the community even better as an enabler in this field of data. Now I turn to Jan Bjaalie with a question about the international and global perspective, because the Human Brain Project and Ebrains are very closely involved in a number of strategic collaborations internationally. So which of these are the most important, and how do you see, Jan, the future prospects?
Thank you, Paweł. So I'm happy to give a comment on that, and we can actually maybe go straight to the first slide on this topic. So particularly then addressing two international organizations anchored in Europe and across the world. That is the INCF, the International Neuroinformatics Coordinating Facility, and it's the IBI, the International Brain Initiative. So the INCF started as an organization focusing exactly on data and building databases on tools, software tools, and the sharing of these tools, and on modeling and simulation. And gradually it evolved into being what it is today, a standards organization for open and fair neuroscience. Fair, of course, meaning that you can find the research, you can access the research, you can interpret, and you can reuse. IBI is an organization with 7 large brain initiatives from across the world, focusing on catalyzing and advancing ethical neuroscience through international collaboration and knowledge sharing. So let's first take a look at INCF. So with regard to overlap, so to speak, or areas of interest from Ebrains and HBP into INCF, we have maybe these 3 main areas. One is on metadata. Metadata is very important because that is the information describing the data. That gives the context, that makes it possible to find, to compare the data. But you do not want to develop one way of thinking around metadata in one part of the world and another one in another part of the world. You need to do that by having collaborations and thinking across borders. We do that through the INCF, and actually HBP supports and funds part of that action in the INCF. And what we do on metadata developments in HBP is done in collaboration with INCF, which is a very efficient way of doing it. INCF is also delivering knowledge space, and actually also with funding from HBP. That is an encyclopedia which is relevant for our Ebrains data and knowledge services, obviously. And they deliver a service, training space. That is a fantastic place to go to collect information about what's available about courses and training material from many places around the world. We are delivering our material in there as well. For example, this week, our Ebrains data knowledge teams delivered 5 videos, tutorials into training space at INCF, and at the same time you can go and get comparable materials from all around the world. The International Brain Initiative is made up of large projects and umbrellas of funding in the brain research area in Canada, USA, Japan, Korea, China, Australia, and Europe, where HBP is representing the European part. So the International Brain Initiatives focus on accelerating neuroscience by enabling research activity and collaboration at the global scale. So making possible exchange of ideas, opportunities, challenges, also by simply meeting and learning properly about everything going on. It's a fantastic forum to really connect. Building collaborative networks and augmenting the national brain initiatives or the regional brain initiatives in the case of Europe. Not doing the research, it's not a research program in itself, but it's augmenting the brain initiatives. So IBI has defined a set of aspirational goals, and to get something done with regard to those, the IBI has working groups in these 6 areas, as you can see here, and HBP is participating in all of these working groups. I'd like to point out just a few examples of this work, particularly focusing on the neuroethics working group, which was the first started in the IBI. They started about 4 or 5 years ago. And why did they start? Well, it might have happened anyway, but certainly it played a role that the HBP had initiated a very large activity in the ethics and society area. So HBP has been a driver in this field, and it's been taken up by initiatives around the world. Very productive working group, producing very concrete reports, answers from the different initiatives around the world to a number of questions in this field, moving things forward. And then I also like to give a couple of examples only from what is happening on the data standards and sharing working group level. So this is something you can find on the International Brain Initiative web pages, of course, and here is just information about what's happening on data standards and sharing training activities. So they are actually helping to bring together initiatives to produce more material, to make sure this material is available globally, and use also these tools that I mentioned from the INCF. So it helps bring together actions around the world to make sure that we do the best in the area of training of researchers. And finally, actually addressing one of the topics we just discussed, data governance. This is a challenge inside Europe. It's an even greater challenge, bigger challenge across continents. So this has been taken up by the IBI, first resulting now in a report which is available as a preprint at this point on the way to a journal, and it describes carefully these challenges, and it provides recommendations from the perspectives not only of Europe but of the US and Japan and the other initiatives around the world. I believe that's a very helpful step in trying to make the first concrete attempts to do something in this field. We simply have to do it. We cannot have large cohorts on different parts of the planet and not use all the values from these enormous information bases. A great challenge, and something that Ebrains will be very devoted to be following up on as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, for what you have said today, but also for your leadership in this area, because you are, by all means, at the forefront of putting our research community at the heart of these international collaborations. In the remaining 2 minutes of our panel, I would like to ask you a follow-up question about the other side of the international dimension, namely, how do we benchmark ourselves with respect to what others do globally. I'm going to avoid the word competition here because I think the spirit of our conversation is more to focus on collaborations. But when you think about the other players in this global landscape, what does it tell us about where we are and where we aim to be?
Yes, I believe the IBI perspective on this is clearly to create synergies. It's to be aware of what is going on in different locations. I don't think we will have a complete, let's say, non-overlap situation. We should have overlap, we should have redundancy. It's also the nature of science to have that. So being aware of, making use of the information is important. And of course, Ebrains is now leading in certain areas and should continue to do that intensively and work with the other initiatives, and then also take up what we have of excellent inputs from other parts of the world. Make sense of all that together.
Good, thank you very much. So Paul, Jan, thank you for being with me together in this panel. I think we explored what needs to happen in the next years in order for these synergies to be created and for us to aim at something which is the benefit of scale. And that's, I think, where brain research in Europe needs to be.